And you'd like to have talent directed toward positive sum rather than negative sum entrepreneurship. You'd rather have people like, say, Bill Gates, interested in getting rich by writing software and selling it to people so their computers can do more things, than people like 12th century William Marshall, who wants to get rich by figuring out how to stick people with spears while riding a horse, and then extract 1/3 of the agricultural produce of the Earldom of Pembroke for himself and his knights, simply because they have horses and spears and the peasants do not. A society in which your talented and aggressive people learn how to stick other people with spears is going to be a less productive one than one in which they write software. You've got to direct your talent toward positive sum rather than negative sum entrepreneurship. And how do you do that? Especially if you start out 1800 as a relatively poor economy, a relatively poor region, which isn't already in the industrializing North Atlantic web. And over the past 150 years or so, there have been about 5 different theories of what should be done for economic development. And the first one, the old days, was imperialism and colonialism. That there are some countries that are more advanced and others that are less, and the more advanced countries should conquer the others and should teach them, like older brothers teach younger brothers, et cetera, how to become rich and prosperous and civilized. This is why school children in the Côte d'Ivoire, in the Ivory Coast, in 1946, were being taught how their ancestors, the Gauls, resisted the attacks of Julius Caesar at the fortress of Alesia in central France back in 52 BC. So there was the great wave of European imperialism. There was then considerable excitement for central planning, especially given the statistics released by the Soviet Union in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s about the Soviet industrialization experience. Then there was a wave of enthusiasm for focusing on infrastructure, on having the World Bank build ports, railways, dams, and the guided development guided by the government. You then had a belief that you should follow import substitution, that if countries let themselves specialize in the goods and services where it appeared to be easy to export, that poor countries were trapping themselves into making low-value agricultural products and would never acquire the technological know-how they needed to become rich. And last, there was the bet that I was a part of, the bet starting in the late 1980s, that something called neoliberalism was the right road to economic development. And the politics of this doesn't always wind up the way, or didn't always line up the way you would think. For example, here we have an unexpected advocate of colonialism, right? Someone who talks about the conquest of India by Britain, and how, yes, it was bloody, the British imposed political unity by the sword, but now at least the peasants don't need to worry about getting killed by marauding Maratha bands coming in from the south. We have some talk about natives, but the talk is about how the natives are springing up, out of the natives are springing up a fresh class of effective administrators, engineers, and how steam power has greatly shrunk the communication distance between India and Europe. About how the ruling classes of Great Britain conquered India just for their own selfish purposes, because they thought it was a way to get rich, either through plunder or through markets. And yet now, in the process of figuring out how to exploit the Indian market, they've built a network of railroads across India. And this is going to be the source of an absolutely magnificent economic transformation. And our advocate concludes by first, praising the Hindus for their aptitude for accommodating themselves to new labor and acquiring the knowledge of machinery, and saying that one impact of the coming of modern machinery, the modern division of labor, is going to dissolve the Indian caste system to its great benefit. And this guy is Karl Marx, writing The Future Results of British Rule in India in the New York Daily Tribune on August 8, 1853. That colonialism has been extremely bloody and brutal for India, but is in the long run, Marx said, likely to be the very best thing to ever happen to it, which would kind of get him stoned in virtually any Indian city today were he to stand up and say this. He looks to have been wrong. That is, it doesn't look like the British colonization of India did anything to boost its rate of economic growth or development. That whatever good was done by railroads and infrastructure and ports appears to be offset by bad done by overturning landed property institutions the British did not really understand, and whatever good was done by bringing machines into India was offset by the fact that the British government was totally uninterested in education. That you look at similar countries in Asia that remained independent, of which there really were only 2, Japan and Thailand. And both Japan and Thailand appear to have done significantly better under colonialism, during the colonial era, Japan magnificently so. So we gave up on imperialism and colonialism. Central planning. It is certainly true that central planning in the Soviet Union in the 1930s created something that turned out to be uniquely valuable to the world come 1941 and World War II. That is because Joseph Stalin was running a centrally planned economy. He built huge tank factories on the far side of the Ural Mountains as far as possible from Germany. And so even when the Nazis had overrun most of the populated regions of Russia, Russia's tank factories were still there building tanks. And certainly true that a market economy would have located all the tank factories near the border. And so that our collective Allied victory in World War II probably owes a lot to the fact that Stalin's central plan was to build lots of tank factories and to build them far away from the border. That aside, central planning really doesn't have much to recommend it, neither in the Soviet Union nor elsewhere. And in fact, Alexander Gerschenkron, who was the dissertation advisor of one of my dissertation advisors, Peter Temin, and who started out his U.S. academic career here at Berkeley in the 1940s. He pointed out in the late 1950s that practically all of the statistics released by the Soviet Union about its own industrialization experience proved to be wrong, or at least severely misleading. The idea that the World Bank would invest in infrastructure and that would make poor economies rich, or that governments would guide development to underdeveloped regions, didn't seem to do very well either. Import substitution, the idea that you should put high tariffs on imports of machinery and build up your own kind of heavy manufacturing industries, proved to be a complete disaster. Like in Argentina in 1970, you had 8 different automobile manufacturers, none of which could manufacture at anything like an efficient scale. So by the end of the 1980s, having seen 4 successive waves of ideas about what development policy should be fail, the world, or at least the great and good of the world, or at least the powerful of the world, turned toward this thing called neoliberalism. And the belief was that if you're a poor country, especially if you're a poor country with lots of natural resources, it's going to be almost impossible to keep the government from becoming highly corrupt. So the best thing you could do would be to shrink the corrupt state, and then to encourage as much international trade as possible. Because as much contact as possible between poor countries and rich countries would at least put people in touch with people who understood how to use technology, and you could get a lot of technology transfer out of that. The other thing that turned out to be important to do was to provide entrepreneurs with access to credit. and to build social capital, especially through female education, and kind of send all your children, especially the girls, to school for as long as possible. And these 4 sets of policies: open borders to encourage international trade, downward pressure on the size of states and how much of the economy they controlled, market access to credit, and building social capital, especially female education, were collectively supposed to be the magic bullet to lead to faster development. Unfortunately, shrinking the state ran into building social capital. You really can't do both, since private markets don't do a very good job of boosting education. It's hard to get people to invest that much that insert in the future. So these 2 initiatives largely cancel each other out, or this one managed to kind of negate this. And if a government's corrupt, is there any reason to believe that if you make it privatize its water company, it won't do so in a corrupt and inefficient way? That asking a corrupt economy to run an honest auction in order to privatize state enterprises is asking for real trouble. Encourage international trade. We have an argument over whether that would have been much better than it has been if not for the rise of China. That is, that the rise of China as a world exporter has kind of crowded out a great deal of the space that 20 to 25 years ago we thought would be occupied in the world division of labor by countries like Mexico. And so a whole bunch of factories we thought would be located in Mexico today are instead located in China. And so the benefits to Mexico of something like the North American Free Trade Agreement that I worked on have turned out to be much less than I was confidently predicting back in 1992. Microcredit, right? The Green Bank and other initiatives to give people with ideas access to money to turn the ideas into good things appears to be the one big win of the neoliberal agenda, but only on a very small scale. This, too, did not turn out to be the magic bullet. And so we confront the second decade of the 21st century without any terribly good ideas about how to speed the pace of world development, other than to tell countries, look at what East Asia is doing, look at what Western Europe did in the generation after World War II, even look at India right now. They're clearly doing something right. So what did you get out of that 12-minute gallop through comparative development economics, through what should be done to kind of reduce the great global inequality across countries that we now see in our world? Here, I don't think there's an especially right answer. I believe in some answers more strongly than others. That is, I tend to think D is important. But E is definitely important as well. There's an argument for C on the grounds that unless you have a high investment economy, you're going to have a very hard time raising your efficiency of labor, because if you look at any single enterprise, you see a huge chunk of knowledge of new technologies is actually embodied in machines, and so you need to invest in those machines to get the technology. And then there's even an argument that you need to export to the first world to be able to afford to buy the machines that will get you the higher efficiency of labor. And A, it's certainly the case that if you don't go through the demographic transition, you'll wind up poor, but virtually everybody is already, that there seems to be no great need for policy to boost that. So I'd say B is probably the right answer, but this is a matter of opinion and debate. The other half of the future of economic growth isn't how do you get the poor countries of the world to kind of catch up to the North Atlantic, but how do you keep rapid economic growth going in the North Atlantic industrial core. And it's very much the same, right? That to get a higher efficiency of labor, you once again need infrastructure, you need education, you need honest government, you need your talent directed in positive some directions. But if you're already at the world's leading technological edge, you need not just how to figure out how to adapt technologies invented otherwise for your conditions, but you need invention as well. And how do you get that? Well, how do you spur research and development? Well, you have to have basic research to figure out what the underlying scientific principles are. You have to have applied research to figure out what actually the basic research allows people to figure out how to do that's useful. You then have to have interfaces between the technologies and the human beings who are actually going to use it. So people on the factory floor or wherever can actually make use of the products of research and development. You need marketing to convince people that they really ought to use this brand of computer or this brand of numerically controlled machine tool, or they should take 2 tablespoons of flax oil every day for general omega-3 health or whatever. And you also face a bunch of potentially conflicting considerations. There's the idea that you want to avoid free riding. You want to avoid too much copying by some people of the work of others, because if everyone knows their work is going to be copied, they're going to have a big incentive not to work too hard on it, to try to figure out how to gain profits from it, rather than to figure out how to advance technology. On the other hand, you want to have people able to stand on the shoulders of giants. Right, this was Sir Isaac Newton's line, that if I've seen farther than other scientists, it is because I have stood on the shoulders of giants. Very good line. Means that we genuinely like things like open source software that allow the scientific and technological community to use whatever's been developed before. And then there's stepping on toes. Right? That does it really make sense to have 8 different companies trying to start the same kind of social network and competing with each other and making their social networks incompatible with each other until Facebook wins and everyone else surrenders? How much resources are wasted in that? To try to resolve these issues, we have systems of patent and copyright laws, we have systems of antitrust laws, and in Europe what they call competition policy, and we have a very diversified institutional portfolio here in today's world, ranging all the way from government-sponsored institutions like the National Institutes of Health to non-profit, largely research organizations like Rockefeller University or UC Berkeley, on up through, say, for-profit companies, and then selected loose groups of human beings organized around a charismatic leader like Wikipedia around Jimmy Wales or Linux around Linus Torvalds. And the big conclusion seems to be that a diversified institutional portfolio seems to be best. And the question is, how do we keep our institutional portfolio for research and development properly diversified going into the future? And that's a question. I don't have an answer to it. There are people up at the Haas School who think they have an answer. There are people at the information school who think they have an answer. I have a second cousin, Tom Khalil, who used to be here at Berkeley, who's now special assistant to President Obama for technology. He's supposed to have the answer. I'll talk to him over the weekend and tell you on Tuesday what he thinks. And let me stop there.